issue?
There is a real issue. I mean, I know in the just going back quickly to strategies, and the distinction between the distributors and the exhibitors, for example, is particularly in the approach on day and dates. And in America, where they've tried day and date releasing, which is essentially releasing it everywhere at once, because the idea that all the windows have collapsed, so you just release it everywhere and you try and get it to everyone as fast as you can. But there's been a hell of a response from the theatrical market to actually not allow that to happen. So I'm wondering whether there's actually a sense that there's an opposition to that happening here, or whether distributors are really seriously thinking about that here as an approach, and whether they're actually getting the theatres. One of the companies that actually did do it was 2929, which is Todd Wagner's company, and this guy's an internet guru, and he basically had billions of dollars, and he went out and bought his own theatrical market. And again, he bought his own pay TV network, he bought his own theatrical market, and he released it on all of them. So he's releasing films that they put out, so he can actually do that. But basically, everyone else thought he was the Antichrist. He was described as the Antichrist in the trades. But is there a sense that that's actually a real, maybe Nick, in terms of, is that something you really seriously kind of?
I think you have to. I think you're crazy not to. I think, as John said, there are millions of films being downloaded illegally.
But are there theatres who would say, well, we're not going to accept your film into it if you do it day-to-day?
We had this triopoly, so they simply won't release the film.
Well,
and I heard a story recently about a film that the major exhibitors exerted so much control as to influence the change in the DVD release date, because they pointed out that this was inside the
120 days.
120-day window. That's what a triopoly...
Very familiar with that story.
Thought you might be.
Yeah.
That's what a triopoly does, meaning the Hoyt's Great Union Village Roadshow, Readings.
Yeah, I mean, we won't go into the possibility of taking all of those theatrical chains, exhibition chains, majors to the ACCC. That's probably for another time.
Well, it's been done, and they failed.
Well, they failed.
I mean, this is the thing. You will not get the exhibitors to sit on this panel with some very notable exceptions to really address this stuff. And that's, what does need to be grappled with here.
So, just quickly, moving on a little bit, I was just interested, given that most of the people in this room probably understand, but I'll just explain it. One of the new things about the offset is that the role of distribution is actually even more important in terms of financing films, because the one single difference between you getting 20% rebate for whatever you're making and a 40% rebate is having theatrical distribution. So in this way, not just any distribution, but theatrical distribution matters. Tate's doesn't work in the area that actually does the kind of certificating for what represents a formal distribution deal, but there has been a lot of shifts over the last 18 months since this system's been in place about what actually represents a genuine interest from a distributor. Is it actual cash? Initially, there was a very prescriptive set of rules, which was a certain amount of cinemas in a certain amount of cities and so on. So it was seemed to be kind of very, very locked in. Then there was a sense that it was going to open up and be much more loose, like a kind of intention from a distributor. I wasn't sure even how much cash had to come across the table. So I'm just wondering, perhaps Nick, John, I mean, where your sense at the moment of how you're sensing the view of Screen Australia about this whole relationship of the actual real intention to distribute is, or whether it's no different to what you've just, because you're actually in the role of distribution, it doesn't matter. But perhaps Sue, what feedback you've had from people about what represents distributors. If I'm distributing myself, for example, is that going to satisfy the test from Screen Australia's point of view?
I think you've ended up with a question that Tate can probably best deal with.
I think this isn't settled. I think it'll only rear its head, though, when an offset film comes through and doesn't get
released on the screen.
Is threatening not get released. I know what I can say is what Brian Rosen said at the FFC, because the FFC was administering it the first year, and he said that he believed it was his definition, and he said this publicly, was that it was about the spirit of the intention that this be a theatrical film, have a theatrical distribution deal, and get a theatrical release, as opposed to some box-ticking exercise of actually getting a release.
Yeah.
But I still think that if it came to that, I still think that any distributor who had the rights, and even a producer, if there was no distributor, could set up a sort of contractual obligation theatrical release to qualify. I suspect that would be the case. But we all know that some films, fully intended to be theatrical, maybe,
There were films that went through the FFC that never got released. There were films that never got released.
That's right. So it's really hard to make a very good film, and we all accept that there are going to be films that don't make it to theatrical release standard. But the formal answer is I don't think we've had a case yet.
Yeah.
The flip will be, of course, though, those films that aren't theatrical, that will get a release theatrically to access the 40%.
Yeah.
And we took, I can't even count the number of calls from particularly documentary filmmakers who were funded to make their hour of telly, and we've got another 30 minutes sitting in the shed. We can slap it on. We'll get the extra 20% rebate. We can pay for the P&A. We'll release it at 5 screens.
But you still have to hit the threshold, which is $1 million.
Yes.
1 million qualifying Australian production expenditure. So just because you've made a documentary film, for instance, and think, oh, I'm getting into the cinemas, don't be mistaken that you're going to be qualifying for the 40% rebate, because you still have to meet that threshold.
Boxes to tick, absolutely. But I mean, in these cases, they had ticked those other boxes. They were quite, big productions. But there is the option of the risk of it being ruled the other way. And I think in a way, having theatrical as the benchmark for what qualifies as a piece of cinema or film is perhaps a little short-sighted given the way distribution is moving, the way consumption of content's moving.
My only reason really for bringing up it was actually the fact that this is actually a shifting field, and I wasn't sure whether there'd been anyone who's actually been seeing with the extent to which this is a shifting field. But John, perhaps you'd want to talk about it a little bit.
Well, there are two things that, that really in the business, to survive as a distributor, you have to have is information and relationships. It's as simple as that. But the business of most people are sort of talking about, the delivery of content. It doesn't, I don't think it matters how it's delivered. I don't care whether it gets delivered down a pipe, whether it's 35mm, whether it's in a cinema, whether it's on the internet. The fundamental business of distribution is marketing. So basically, my distribution company is a marketing company, and that's entirely what drives it. And how it actually, if there is, for instance, look, the moment that we get, wide enough bandwidth and fast enough download, it's a different problem of marketing and a very different problem of actually getting paid for it.
Monetizing.
No one's made the internet work in terms of creating income from it yet. Probably the way to do it is provide the content free and sell product around it. That's how free television worked, and that's probably how the internet will eventually work.
And what about different? I mean, there may be different things. I mean, one of the discussions and the entrepreneurial thoughts about how you could deal with day and dates, for example, and bring the theatricals on board, would be to actually say, well, if you actually go and buy a cinema ticket, you're going to get the soundtrack for free. If you don't go to the cinema, you don't go to the cinema, or you get it at home, or you don't get So the idea is that there may be different ways that you can actually provide value and be entrepreneurial about where you provide that value to actually encourage people to go and spend their money in the cinemas. Or the other thing that the internet's kind of been quite good at doing is saying you get a little bit of crappy quality, or a little bit of this or that and the other, or you get a taster, but if you spend your money, you actually get the full thing in the film.
Richard, the cinemas, I think, are already doing this, and they're doing it in really in a massive way. Is that most of the programming in the majors is programmed around concessions. So it's what they can sell at the candy bar, what they can sell, basically in popcorn and ice cream, etc. There's a lot of programming that's entirely programmed around concessions. And so it's not programmed DVDs and soundtracks or whatever else. It's a different sort of programming, different nature of how it's been set up. Many of these, I think, have been set up really to make enormous profits out of selling garbage to punters.
But you've got to keep remembering that the cinema is just the beginning of the long tail. And this is the thing that's been fundamentally different now to what it was 10 years ago, and certainly even 5 years ago. That if we actually ask the question, well, not what is the gross box office or how many people sit in cinemas, and I agree, there's still going to be a future for people wanting that communal experience in cinemas, but how many people actually get to see the cultural product by way of DVD, by way of television screening, by way of download, by pay TV? And I think we're asking the wrong questions often, with this obsession about gross box office, because it's in that long tail. And now, if we're incentivising producers to get involved and working with distributors to really maximise, we know the product that we set out to make, because we had the dream in the first place, and we've battled for it for a long time to get it made. We can actually keep working to reach those audiences over the long tail.
Which is why I think that IFC model actually, I don't think it's frightening at all. I think it's actually exciting that there are more alternatives to get film out there. I think they need to be there, and I think that the sooner we can get the major exhibitors to buy into the model on one level or another, and it won't suit some films, and some films were better served with going with the traditional windows, but others where you might only have 5 or 10 screens, but you're doing the marketing campaign anyway, you want to make that film available while the marketing's out there to the broader audience. And if it's VOD, or if it's a day and date DVD, or even if it's on pay TV, for example, I think having those alternatives are really important. Doing with both the volume and the access.
In many ways, the IFC does exactly what you're saying, Tate, which is actually overturns, or all of this stuff overturns the paradigm of the last 80 years. And in fact, that's the exciting thing of right now. The whole paradigm, which was production, distribution, exhibition, this whole thing, and in fact, as I said, we've got a whole series of hybrids here, where the paradigm is now producers with distributors now with produce, like it's actually collapsed, potentially collapsing that and actually cutting out more of those middlemen too, so you can actually find those audiences much more directly. And part of that holistic thing has to be about giving the producers to actually have the equity and the revenue to actually make that, for them to go and do it.
You start to think a little bit more differently about what you're going to spend the next 5 years or 7 years of your life, because to do a feature film on average is around 5-year commitment as a producer. And if you've got an incentive to start approaching this in a much more entrepreneurial way, and that you're going to share some of that reward with the distributors and the exhibitors, it really focuses your mind. And quite apart from the fact that I have not had as much fun for a long time as I have now getting involved in the distribution of the work and being involved in the marketing campaign directly. And I've always worked in partnership with distributors and exhibitors, but to actually have a direct something at stake in order to see the success of the film, it's inviting producers to really participate and in a way that they haven't before. And that's what I was saying. I think there's a responsibility back on the producers to make better work that works better for audiences, and that being incentivised, I think, will get us there.
One of the questions I was interested from the panellists was to say, if they thought there was one thing or a range of things that Screen Australia could do, given that we're in the middle right now of a marketing review, a review of the whole marketing and kind of that area of the organisation. I mean, where do they think Screen Australia should be focusing? Because one of the big issues that's been around for many years is that there's been a lot of subsidy and tax-based subsidy directed at development, or actually not so much directed at development, but directed at production and to some extent development, and there's been none on distribution. So I'm still interested in some of the panellists' views on what they think.
Well, I've got an opinion on that, Richard, that I think for more than 20 years I've actually quite vigorously represented to policymakers that the subsidy to Australian cinema has been hijacked by producers. And so the only subsidy that's ever been given is at the production sector. It's a sort of a material thing. People are interested in sort of the amount of money that's spent in production, the numbers of films that are being made, etc. No one's ever evaluated the social and cultural and entertainment value that you can get from these sorts of things, because they can't be sort of quantified. So in the quantification of it, it's always hijacked by producers. And they haven't been particularly smart about it, because at the time now when, of course, we have more product from all over the world coming together, the policy failure now is more evident. What should have always happened is we should have had a huge amount of money put into development, which has been a constant thing all over the world. Like in any other R&D, you used to get and still can get 150% deduction when you're truly sort of trying to produce new product. And the marketing of it is so important. But to actually to spread that in an equitable way to make it work. If you look after the development and you look after the marketing, strangely enough, that little bit in the middle will soon start to look after itself. And that's always seemed to me a big political thing, because you're getting over a mindset of, first of all, those who have got a specific interest. And it's interesting that those are the producers who absolutely always complaining about not having access to their market or got poor results to it. One of the reasons that there is these poor results is, in fact, because the policy dollars have actually been very poorly distributed. And until that sort of imbalance, we're just sort of talking around the edges. I think they're going to spend $7 million in marketing through Screen Australia out of their budget. I mean, that's probably not even what they spend on their staff.
I mean, it is interesting. You're absolutely right. I mean, the downloads are here, and what I'm not seeing is a collapse in box office worldwide yet. I mean, I think the growth is slowed, and but I do think the interesting thing. That's why I'm talking about the $10 DVDs. I think the film industry has been fascinating. I mean, the DVDs were $90 when they started out bringing out DVDs, whereas CDs have practically not changed their price. And I think one of the things, I'm hopeless at attempting to do pirated downloads. I've tried for research purposes a number of times, and I think there's a whole generation of people for at least a while yet who are, I'm time poor and technology kind of not that great, and so I would prefer to pay $10 for a DVD, really, truthfully. So rather than trying to spend all my time trying to go, oh, it's wrong, and then finding out it's downloaded and there's some problem with some sort of file charge over, and so for me it's easy. $10, that's complete great value for me. And to me, the secret is to find a way to get that value, to actually people to say that's value. That's I've actually valued, got the money, the time, and everything, and worked out which one's the value for me. And I think that's interesting that somehow DVDs have come down to $10 and CDs are still $20. I think it'll be interesting to see some more of those models coming out with like iTunes for movies.
iTunes have got the best model so far.
And I still think that the iTunes model is still too expensive, personally. But that's I still, in comparison to DVDs. So for me, I think there's those sorts of models. Whether or not they'll still stand in the way of the overall, maybe in 20 years' time, it'll be so easy that even people like me can actually pirate without even thinking about it. But right now, I don't have the time and energy to do it. And I think that there's, there are possible ways but by the time we get there, we can actually look at all of these things, which is about the merchandising or the other bits that come with things.
I have to say, in documentary, there's some fantastic opportunities out there, and that have been direct result of what the internet offers us by way of a whole set of new marketing tools. So, for instance, now with Film Art Media, we're interested in niche markets, but internationally. And we're interested in looking at not just cinemas, not just TV, pay TV, the old models, but the places where become very focal points for the kind of documentaries we want to sell. So, for instance, we're re-releasing a special edition of The Edge of the Possible, which is the story of Jon Utzon and the design and building of the Sydney Opera House. We're doing that as a joint, venture really with the Sydney Opera House, because they have 1.1 million people that go through the doors every year. That is a market, is a sitting audience for us. A lot of those people, coming internationally. In the past, I had no interest, or there was no reason to even start to exploit that market properly, because anything that came in, I was certainly, we sold all our television territories worldwide, 26 or 27 territories. We returned the money back, assiduously back to the investors, to the FFC. But now we've got, an incentive to get out there and find these little niche markets. And, with other films like Celebrity, Dominic done the same thing. So I think, there are, looking at this long tail and in using the digital distribution models and internet to reach these niche audiences, there's some real opportunities there for distribution.
It was interesting. I'm not sure if this can be recorded, but it was interesting when I heard someone talking about Australian films and the fears they had about piracy. And I have to say, I had this sort of perverse sense of, we wish we would be pirated, because then you're in demand. It's actually almost the same. And I hate to say it, because then I was thinking that's bad, but in fact, we at the moment, I don't think we're even popular enough to be pirated.
Slumdog Millionaire is not getting pirated in India at the moment.
Yeah, it's not.
No, it's not.
Right. Well, so
it's such a small film in India.
But I do think in the end that if you have the right models in place, that a big part is actually getting our films to have demand and actually seeing its value.
We haven't even addressed the nexus with the media, though, because we have a serious problem at the moment, and I don't know how we're going to deal with that. But when you've got films now, Australian releases, almost too afraid to open in Australia because the difficulty that you'll have that wanting to desperately get that international either festival exposure, the big awards, or the overseas release before coming anywhere near Australian box office, because the perceived idea amongst the media is box office poison from Australian film. I hope that will change, because we do actually have, and this last week has been proof of it, an extraordinary bunch of films coming through. So I think, let's hope we're on the other side of the cycle now.
We haven't addressed also the cost of releasing a film for the P&A, and that's an enormous factor competing with the budgets of...
Absolutely.
If we're looking at smaller films, and I didn't really get to answer your question about what I'd say to Screen Australia. What I actually think it would be awfully important to have money in marketing for... I think you have to separate the big films, because you can't put Australia in the same category as a smaller film. But if an exhibition chain or exhibitors say they will release a particular film and the person's self-distributing and hasn't got any money, Screen Australia could give them marketing money, because I think... you've brought up the media, but I think in conjunction with that is the spend.
Does anyone have any models of overseas what works in terms of marketing and distribution? I don't know. Sorry?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment about that, because quite often we're seeing distributors who are really well cashed up. I mean, I'm talking about, quite major distributors who actually don't spend very much money on Australian films. I mean, they just take a point of view at the beginning of it, then they go straight, very small theatrical, straight into DVD, into their package, and then into their pay television and television package. I mean, there's a lot of sort of moving volume through while they wait for their hit to save them for the year. So, you put out 20 pictures a year, sort of 6 or 7 of them will make you money, and that's how sort of many of the distributors work. It's a volume business. And so a lot of the marketing is, it's pretty well risk-free. So it's not just a problem of capital, I don't think.
Today, so I'd just like to thank them all for giving up their time on a Saturday afternoon. And representing a group here of hybrid distributors, producers, exhibitors, I'd like to again thank the audience for coming along today and giving up your Saturday afternoon to listen to these issues. So thanks again.
Cheers.